Parables of the Messiah, number 28, the tares. Matthew 13, verse 24 to 30, and verses 36 to 43. Of all the parables, that concerning the tares has been the cause of the most contention. Its interpretation played an important part in the contentions that arose at the time of the Donatists. The rise and work of this body is noticed in Eureka 2, chapter 7. The Donatists opposed the corruptions which had grown up in Christendom, and denied that many who claimed to be Christians were entitled to be so described. They particularly opposed the growing association of church and state, and consequently by the decrees of Constantine suffered the loss of their buildings used for worship, banishment, and in some cases death. They were opposed by the leaders of the corrupt church, particularly by Augustine, who has the distinction, more than any other of the fathers, of establishing the doctrines of the immortality of the soul, and that the Church was the kingdom of God as accepted tenets of the Church. The Donatists were exclusive, and one of the arguments used against them was based upon the interpretation of the parable of the tares, that Jesus taught that wheat and tares had to grow together until the harvest, and that the discipline which the Donatists called for was not scriptural. The Donatists' reply was a denial of the application made by the Augustinians. The latter taught that the field was the church, where wheat and tares should remain together. The Donatists insisted that in the interpretation given by Jesus, the field was the world, and the lesson of the parable had nothing to do with the question whether spurious and heretical Christians should be excluded from the church. It is a safe rule in the interpretation of a parable that no meaning shall be attached to it that conflicts with the plain teaching of the Scripture. Judged by this, Augustine was as erroneous in his views on church discipline as on the nature of man. The teaching of Jesus lays down the method to be employed in reclaiming any in error. If recovery was not achieved, the offender had to be as a heathen man. Matthew 18, verse 17. Fuller instruction on this matter is naturally to be found in the epistles, and particularly those dealing with ecclesial organization. Paul's counsel concerning the rejection of a heretic after the second admonition, Titus 3 verse 10, appears to have the words of Jesus in mind. In other epistles he is quite explicit about the duty of ecclesias to avoid having no company with, put away, reject, those that were teachers of errors, or who were persistently evil in their ways. The 2nd of Thessalonians 3 verse 6, 1 Corinthians 5 verse 11, 1 Timothy 6 verse 3 to 5, and the 2nd Epistle of John verses 8 to 10. It is quite clear from these commandments given by the apostles, who were authorized to teach by their Lord, that it would be a wrong interpretation of the parable to attempt to deduce from it rules of men's duty when there is laxity in a community of professing believers. It cannot mean that false teachers should be allowed to retain their place in ecclesial life. In later times the Catholics were at pains to reconcile their persecution of heretics with the instruction that wheat and tares must be allowed to grow together until the end of the age. Emphasis was laid on the warning that in gathering up tares the wheat also might be destroyed, and this was taken to mean that the prohibition did not apply where there was no doubt that a man was a heretic. Only when the heresy was not fully revealed must toleration be exercised. On this interpretation, the reason Jesus gave for not plucking up the tares is made into a conditional prohibition. Other views are connected with noted names in ecclesiastical history, as men have sought to explain this parable and fix their conduct in the light of it. But we need not follow these views further. Even if his hearers did not grasp his meaning as Jesus spoke, and even if his explanation was not fully understood at the time, yet there must have been some clear intention in the mind of Jesus. This we should seek. The story is not an improbable one. It is said that Roman law legislated for dealing with such an injurious act as a man oversowing with weeds some cultivated ground. Trench cites modern illustrations of such oversowing from India and Ireland. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, was like unto a man which sowed good seed. While he slept, his enemy sowed tares. His servants, discovering what had happened when growth began, asked if they should pluck up the tares. The master instructed them that both wheat and tares should remain till the harvest, when the reapers should gather up and burn the tares and garner the wheat. The tare is the darnel, about which many who have lived in Palestine have written. In The Land and the Book, Thomson says, "Let me call your attention to these tares which are growing among the barley." The grain is just in the proper stage of development to illustrate the parable. In those parts where the grain has headed out, they have done the same, and there a child cannot mistake them for wheat or barley. But where both are less developed, the closest scrutiny will often fail to detect them. I cannot do it at all with any confidence. Even the farmers who in this country generally weed their fields do not attempt to separate the one from the other. They would not only mistake good grain for them, but very commonly the roots of the two are so intertwined that it is impossible to separate them without plucking up both. Both, therefore, must be left to grow together until the time of harvest. This general rule to let both grow together is not contradicted by the other practice of pulling out an occasional stray stalk. Compare Stanley, Sinai and Palestine, page 426. This was possible and saved much trouble with the grain, whereas a complete oversowing of darnel would make it impossible to eradicate the weed without great damage to the good crop. The darnel, says one who is a native of Galilee, is a very troublesome weed which occurs in the wheat fields of Palestine. Women have to be hired to pick it out from the seed which is to be milled, and very careful farmers will even have it picked out from the wheat which is to be used for seed. As a rule, the separation of the darnel from the wheat is done after the threshing. By spreading the grain out on a large tray which is set before the women, they are able to pick out the darnel, which is a seed similar in shape and size to wheat, but slate grey in colour. Even a few grains left with the wheat will spoil all the harvest. The bitterness of the darnel would make all the bread unpleasant to eat, as well as making the eater ill. The story must have seemed hard to interpret to the listeners, and it is not surprising that when the multitude had been sent away, the disciples asked Jesus its meaning. The very name by which they spoke of the parable, showing what they felt, was the essential difficulty, declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. Jesus then enumerated all the points that had significance. Matthew 13, verse 37 to 43. He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of the world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. At once differences in application between this parable and the parable of the sower appear. Jesus here defines the sower. Also in the sower parable the seed was the word of the kingdom. Here the seed are the individuals, good or bad. These differences have to be kept in mind. The field is the world, Jesus explained, and for a right understanding of the parable we must not change the world into the church. And since the Son of Man is the sower, the starting point of the parable is his own ministry, to which we may perhaps add the work of those who were specifically appointed to, and endowed with power for, the carrying of his message throughout the world. After the sowing of the wheat, an enemy sows tares in the same field. Other sowers began their work, but what they sowed was a counterfeit of the wheat. It resembled it, but it was harmful and useless. The wheat, Jesus said, were children of the kingdom, the darnel children of the wicked one. Yet the latter had professions which corresponded to the former. Thus viewed, the parable is a prediction of the growth of a system which would counterfeit the truth taught by Jesus, which would claim to be his church, but which would be of the wicked one. In his last letter, Paul warns Timothy of perils to come, when men would have a form of godliness, but deny its power, when sound doctrine would not be endured, and fables would be followed. He further indicates that this apostasy would assume the form of a counterfeit of the true. As Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these men resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds reprobate concerning the faith. How did the Egyptian magicians resist Moses? By imitating his work, by repeating as far as they could the wonders that he had done. So again would truth be resisted and error established. No reader of the New Testament epistles and of the Apocalypse can miss the repeated notes of warning which all sound. The warning is not merely of the trials and difficulties that then clouded the sky. The writers look forward to a fuller development of the evils they combated. The atmosphere is charged with the portents of future storm. The history of Christendom could not have been different from what it is, and the predictions of the apostles be fulfilled. In a very short time after the apostles' day, the mysteries which so captivated men's minds in the pagan world had so corrupted the teaching of the apostles that a pagan would have felt at home in one of the ecclesiastical buildings, while the apostles would have been strangers. The development of a priesthood, the changing of the significance of baptism, the adoption of the pagan trinity, of the philosophic notion of the soul's immortality, the introduction of pagan rites such as burning of tapers and other practices unknown in apostolic churches, all marked the change from truth to error, from loyalty to Zion to subservience to Babylon, from whence all these errors had ultimately come. The Darnel are the children of the wicked one. The wicked one is a personification of the thinking of the flesh, and the Darnel thus represents not apostate believers in the ecclesia, but the members of the great apostasy of nominal Christianity, which by a counterfeit has seduced men from the truth which makes free. Should such a growth of evil be allowed? Jesus in the parable shows that it would be allowed to the end of the age. It could only be destroyed with its widespread effect by destroying also the faith established by the labours of the apostles. But there would be a separating time at the end of the age. The Son of Man, the sower, whose labours marked the beginning of the story, will send the angel reapers to gather out of his kingdom all that offends. For the world is his kingdom by divine title, and the time for his possession of it will then have come. It will be a time of judgment for Christendom, when its true nature will be revealed. Then also the children of the kingdom will be revealed in all the splendour of the sunshine. For these children of the kingdom are those of whom Daniel spoke, who turn many to righteousness. And this identification Jesus makes when he thus uses the words of the prophet to describe their reward. The parable has nothing to do with the rules of ecclesial life. It does not teach a compromise of truth with error. It does not authorize the papal church to destroy those regarded by her as heretics. It does indicate the action of the Son of Man in the beginning as the planter of truth. It shows that through the ages he has permitted the evil work of men who counterfeited while destroying his work, but that at last in a day of judgment he will eradicate from his kingdom the evil, God-dishonouring notions of men, and associated with his friends, he will then bring light and health to the world.